But then a drill bit broke through into their chamber when it was pulled back to the surface, and it carried a note that said, "We are all well. We are in a shelter, 33 of us total." And that tiny message sparked an extraordinary rescue effort. For the next 52 days, an international team worked around the clock to drill a rescue shaft. And then after 69 total days, every single one of those 33 men were brought up, one by one, from the crushing darkness. That was, as far as they could understand it, their tomb. But it became a shelter. And what was certain death became an impossible rescue. A moment of utter defeat was dramatically and joyfully reversed. This is analogous to our own experience as human beings. The feeling of being trapped in darkness, of feeling buried by the weight of the world, of believing that all hope is lost. That is a profoundly human experience that we deal with constantly, perhaps many of you deal with here today. And it's in these moments of personal siege that we are tempted to believe that our suffering will only end in final defeat. We can fear that God is distant and that evil wins out, gets the last word. This is the sort of scenario the prophet confronts us with here in these verses. Zechariah chapter 14, verses 1 through 8. In these verses, the prophet paints a picture of an ultimate day of darkness, a day when God's own city, Jerusalem, is besieged and overrun. It is a day that, as far as they could tell, is of certain defeat. There's plunder, there's exile that takes place, and it appears as though evil has won. But the prophet does not leave us there. He reveals that this moment of greatest darkness serves merely as the backdrop for God's greatest light in the appearance of the divine Messiah. In these verses, we discover that we can overcome the fear of final defeat when we anchor our hope in the promise of Jesus, our coming King. And as Don read, he is coming soon. He will win the ultimate victory, and he will establish his kingdom, a kingdom that is a renewed earth, and his presence is always before us, his life-giving presence, as we will see in these verses. And so let us examine and discover God's answer to those moments when all hope seems lost. Look at verse 1. Behold, a day is coming for the Lord, when the spoil taken from you will be divided in your midst. Again, here he speaks to the Jewish people. There's been this weird sort of dance that we've kind of noticed the prophet make, where on the one hand, there is great triumphant declaration of what God stands to accomplish, the redemption he stands to provide for his people. But on the other hand, there is this talk of devastation, talk of neglect, that is the people neglecting God, talk of judgment against them. And here we actually see, behold, a day is coming where you, Jerusalem, will be under siege. Spoil will be taken from you, and it will be divided in your midst. That word day there, understand, does not necessarily have to refer to a 24-hour period. Context is the key for us in understanding that. Here, I think it is best that we understand this as an unspecified period of time. It could be a single 24-hour period, or it could be an entire epic, an entire era of history. If you go further in the verses, you will actually note there are multiple things that occur that you say, how in the world could this happen in 24 hours? So then likely this day that is coming is a larger span of time. Christmas is a way to think about this. When I say the word Christmas, we could mean December 25th, the day, or we could also mean the Christmas season, which is what? Black Friday all the way through Christmas, maybe a few days after Christmas, maybe to the New Year, right? So the day or the time, it's not clear. We need context to help us out. Here, we would say it is a larger span of time, and it is for the Lord. Understand, it is for God's purposes. God has set this time aside, and this time is a time of, first off, triumph over Jerusalem. There's spoil. It's divided up in their midst. That is to say, they are occupied in this moment. Verse 2, for I will gather all the nations against Jerusalem to battle, and the city shall be taken, and the houses plundered, and the women raped. Very horrifying description, horrifying scene. In fact, maybe it harkens in our minds to October 7th. Many of the things described here, we might say, actually already occurred in Israel's midst in the present day. But this is a future time, a time that is coming where all the nations of the earth will engage in this sort of horrific behavior. Think October 7th, but honestly, much worse, tragically. God says, I will gather these nations. God is the primary agent here, and he is gathering these nations to inflict discipline upon Israel. If we go back in the context, you'll remember Israel rejected her shepherd, rejected her Messiah. Instead, she embraced a foolish shepherd, a false Messiah. Well, that rejection of the good shepherd and the embrace of a foolish shepherd incurred discipline, divine discipline against Israel, whom God loves. And these nations will engage in a sort of discipline of Israel. But also, these nations at the same time are being gathered for their own judgments. There's plenty of judgment, if you will, to go around. All these nations, as they gather, understand that they are gathering under demonic influence. Yes, God is the one who declares, I will gather these nations. It is by his providence that all of this will happen. But Revelation chapter 16, verse 14 tells us that these nations succumb to demonic spirits, spirits that perform signs, who go abroad to the kings of the whole world to assemble them for battle on the great day of God the Almighty. These nations are under the influence of demonic forces, and those demonic forces will lead these nations to Israel in order to do all of the heinous things described here. The number one sort of strategy that demons, demonic forces take is deception. And I would venture to say that much of the horrifying things we see here in verse 2, these nations will do this believing that they are actually doing God a favor. They will be led to believe that they're actually doing God's will. You think about October 7th, there was actually a story, or multiple stories I heard, of young boys who would commit a lot of the heinous acts that they did, and they would call their fathers to brag about all that they accomplished, how many Jews they killed. They had been led to believe that they were doing virtuous activity. And that is demonic influence, demonic thinking, deceiving people into thinking that such horrific acts somehow please God. This is going to get so bad as you continue. It says, half of the city shall go out into exile, but the rest of the people shall not be cut off from the city. It's important to understand there's a sort of dichotomy here. We have those who go out, those who are exiled, those who are driven. Well, the last time this happened in Israel's history, Zechariah's audience would know this well. The last time the people were driven out into exile, it was in judgment. It was because of sin. It was because of their own wicked hearts. Likewise here, those who are driven out are the unbelieving from within the city, from within the nation, the idolatrous, those who are imposter people of God, those who willfully, gladly embraced the foolish shepherd as their leader. It is them who will flee. They'll flee in fear. They'll run for their lives. The rest of the people that remain in the city, it says they shall not be, my translation says, cut off. The Hebrew word there for cut off refers to being excluded from the community of Israel. It's actually used in Exodus to speak of those who break Passover, those who break the Sabbath, those who demonstrate that they are not a part of the community. Here, God says, those who are left in the city, they are of the true people of Israel. They are the true covenant people who respond to my will, whose hearts yearn to do what it is that I would ask them to do, who love me with all of their heart, their soul, their mind, and their strength. They who are left, they surely will not be cast out because they are the true covenant people of God. You know, after the September 11th attacks, rescue crews searched the rubble of Ground Zero for any sign of life they could find. And when everything had been reduced to ashes, it looked as though nothing survived, and the workers found a small pear tree. It was crushed and charred. The roots were broken. It was as good as dead, it would seem. But somehow it was discovered that there was still a small amount of life still lingering in that pear tree. The workers carefully lifted it, sent it to be nurtured and replanted, and over time it actually grew strong again. Today it stands tall at the 9/11 Memorial in New York City. Perhaps you've had a chance to go and see this tree for yourselves. It usually has a little fence around it with a bunch of memorabilia to help people commemorate the loss of life on that day. People call it the survivor tree. That tree is a living reminder that even when destruction looks total, life endures. And in Jerusalem's darkest hour here, when nations invade, the city is torn apart and it seems all is lost. But God still holds on, preserves that small remnant. And that small remnant will be nurtured and will grow, will sprout into a living memorial of God's enduring faithfulness amidst all of the chaos. In verse 3, we continue. Then, when you are at your lowest, then, notice, the Lord will go out and fight against those nations as when he fights on a day of battle. The Lord here is the warrior. He will go out and he will fight these nations. The verb there, go out, is used in the Old Testament almost all the time of armies that go out to battle. Yahweh, here, the mighty man of war. He stirs up his zeal. He cries out, he shouts aloud, and he shows himself mighty against his foes. God frequently is portrayed in this way. In the book of Joshua, during the conquest of Canaan, you see when the earth stood still, or the sun stood still, depending on whose perspective you're talking about. But when the earth stood still, Joshua declares, there has been no day like it before or since. The Lord fought for Israel like a warrior. King Jehoshaphat prayed for Judah's protection from an invading army. He was a good king of Judah, celebrated in Chronicles, and he prayed that God would protect Judah, protect Jerusalem. And the prophet answered Jehoshaphat's prayer. The Lord spoke, do not be afraid, do not be dismayed at this great horde, for the battle is not yours, but God's. God is a fierce warrior. He has proven this to be true time and time again throughout Israel's history. And here the prophet says, true to form, Yahweh is going to be the warrior that you have always known him to be, who will intervene at your lowest points and will defeat all of your enemies. But there's one very important point that we need to acknowledge as New Covenant, New Testament believers. Revelation chapter 19, verse 11. John catches a glimpse of this same day, just as Zechariah. And he says, I saw heaven opened, and behold, a white horse. The warrior king has approached. The one sitting on it is called Faithful and True, and in righteousness he judges and makes war. Yahweh, yes, will be the warrior here, but more specifically, Jesus Christ will be that great warrior. He judges and makes war, and by the sword of his mouth he conquers. Verse 4, on that day, his feet, the warrior king, divine Messiah, shall stand on the Mount of Olives that lies before Jerusalem on the east. Many of you have had a chance to go to Israel, to maybe even go to the Mount of Olives. I envy you. It feels as though I'm never going to get the opportunity until this moment in redemptive history when I get to witness this event firsthand. The Mount of Olives is directly east of Jerusalem, facing the Temple Mount. Probably the best parallel I can give you. In our context, think of the monogram on the mountain, facing liberty. The Mount of Olives served as a natural obstruction to a quick escape from the east. It actually served to box Jerusalem in. They could not flee from the east. They would have to find other ways to flee. In fact, the Romans knew this well. In 70 AD, when they wanted to invade Jerusalem, guess where they went? The Mount of Olives, because there they have the high ground, and they surround Jerusalem, and they're able to do their bidding. Here, we see, on that day, his feet shall stand. Now, for us as New Testament believers, this isn't really problematic for us to see this. His feet shall stand. We know exactly whose feet it is. It's Jesus Christ, right? But for Zechariah and his audience, his feet, Yahweh has feet. God is spirit, as Jesus declares in the Gospel of John, recorded in the Gospel of John. So it would seem to be anthropomorphic is the term that simply means we ascribe human qualities to God. But no, we can actually say this is his feet. This is his Jesus Christ, his human divine feet. And what's the significance here? The fact that his feet shall stand. Well, have you ever trespassed before? Your feet crosses a line and all of a sudden stands somewhere that doesn't belong to you. Him standing here on the Mount of Olives is a sign of ownership. He steps foot on what is rightfully his. And I love what happens. Keep going in the verse. And the Mount of Olives upon which he stands, it is his mountain. That Mount of Olives shall be split in two from east to west by a very wide valley, so that one half of the mount shall move northward and the other half southward. It was a barrier to escape. Jerusalem would be boxed in because of that mountain. But here, Messiah comes, Jesus Christ comes, he steps his feet on the mountain and it splits and it creates a great valley. Valleys, of course, are the escape ways. This is proven true all throughout war, even in World War I with the trenches, right? Trenches are man-made valleys, if you will. It's made to protect soldiers, and that's the idea. Messiah comes, and he immediately creates an escape path for his people to rally behind him and his army as they march forth to do their work. This is one of many topographical changes that will occur in the last days. That word topographical just means land change. Here you have a literal mountain that is split in two at Christ's coming in the last days. There's plenty of other examples of this. Isaiah 2 verse 2 actually indicates that the Temple Mount, maybe even Jerusalem itself, will be elevated above all the surrounding hills and mountains. Imagine that, Jerusalem being as high as Mount Everest, or something like that. I'm sure it's referring to local mountains, maybe not far away mountains like Everest. But still, Jerusalem will be elevated high. Great earthquakes, Revelation 16 says, will cause islands to vanish and mountains to move. It's harder to, what's the expression? It's harder to renovate a house than it is to just start over from the ground up. That's what you see happening here. A renovation of the entire earth at Jesus' coming. This is why Paul will say, creation waits eagerly for the revelation of the sons of God and, of course, Jesus Christ. Because in that moment, creation, the trees, the ocean, the mountains, all of it is set free from the bondage to corruption. Verse 5, and you shall flee to the valley of my mountains, for the valley of the mountains shall reach to Azal, and you shall flee as you fled from the earthquake in the days of Uzziah, king of Judah. Then the Lord my God will come, and all the holy ones with him. Interesting, that earthquake there in the days of Uzziah, this is actually not described at all in our Bibles. The only other place this is referred to is in the prophecy of Amos, chapter 1, verse 1. It was probably a significant event, an earthquake that was well familiar to the Jewish people. Of course, earthquakes was not uncommon in Israel during that time, but this earthquake would have been quite extraordinary, considering Zechariah here speaks 2 centuries removed. You know, the great earthquake, the great devastating earthquake that we still reminisce about. When I went to California, it didn't take long before I learned about the Northridge earthquake. That's a famous earthquake. You've heard of it, right? This earthquake that really just did tremendous devastation. Of course, I was very young at that time, so I didn't know anything about it. But to this day, it's still a very important event in California history. And here for Israel, there was a great earthquake in the days of Uzziah. And Zechariah uses that as an analogy and says, you know that earthquake? Child's play. There is coming an earthquake unlike anything you have ever seen. I just said in Revelation 16, it's an earthquake powerful enough to swallow up islands. This earthquake is going to come. And then, I love this, the Lord my God will come. The Lord who is my God, the prophet declares. Yahweh, my God. And of course, this is divine Messiah that he's referring to. Perhaps in this moment, Zechariah is actually declaring, Messiah, I don't yet know who you are, but you, yes, are my God. This Messiah, my Yahweh, my God, he comes, behold, to redeem my people. I think of Thomas. Feel the scars in my side. Feel the scars in my hand, Thomas. And what does Thomas say? My Lord and my God. Here Zechariah declares similarly. And it says, all the holy ones with him. A great army he brings with him. Now, most people interpret holy ones as angels. Now, I did a little searching through the Hebrew in the Old Testament, and I really couldn't find a solid verse that, to me, clearly indicates holy ones has to refer to angels. Not to mention, when you go to Revelation chapter 19, verse 14, you actually see John beholds the coming of Messiah, and he says, the armies of heaven arrayed in fine linen. And in the book of Revelation, there's only one individual or set of individuals that wear fine linen. Saints, believers, those whom Jesus Christ granted to wear those fine linens. I believe the holy ones here then are believers. Us, beloved, me and you, if indeed you have trusted in Messiah, in Jesus as your Savior. Behold, he comes with his army, but he doesn't need his army. They're just there to watch. All his redeemed come with him. As a young soldier in the trenches of World War I, J.R.R. Tolkien saw firsthand the horror of a world under siege. That name may sound familiar to you. I understand I may be going out on a limb here to talk about this man. A British audience would know very well who J.R.R. Tolkien is. He was a man of deep Christian faith, and you should know that it's because of his influence that actually C.S. Lewis became a believer. They were colleagues. Out of Tolkien's experience in World War I, he coined a word. He was a wordsmith. He liked to play with words. And he came up with this word he called eucatastrophe, E-U catastrophe. It means, if you were to translate it, the good catastrophe. The sudden, miraculous turn when all hope seems lost and grace breaks in. All of that enveloped in this word, catastrophe. And Tolkien actually endeavors to illustrate this in his book, The Lord of the Rings. There's a small kingdom of people who are trapped in a mountain fortress. They're besieged by an army, literally an army of monsters, 10,000 strong. The battle rages. All hope seems lost. The king himself is watching all of his people slowly wipe out, and he begins to lose hope. And at his most desperate moment, all of a sudden, there appears, as the sun rises in the east, there appears Gandalf, the great wizard. And he brings with him a great army, and he's even riding on a white horse. It's as if Tolkien wanted to provide for us just another glimpse of this marvelous truth. The greatest story of all, in his words, the ultimate catastrophe. Here, when Israel is at their lowest, indeed, when all humanity is at their lowest, with all of the nations having been deceived into this moment, the all-powerful king returns from the east, bringing his army with him for that final miraculous victory. Verse 6, on that day there shall be no light, cold, or frost. Remember, on that day, it could be referring to a 24-hour period, could be referring to a span of time here. At that time, when this transpires, when the king comes, when the warrior comes to fight for you, Israel, there shall be no light, cold, or frost, and there shall be a unique day, which is known only to the Lord. Neither day nor night, but at the evening time there shall be light. Seems as if the diurnal cycle is just thrown out of whack here. Potentially one singular day, a 24-hour period, special moment in God's future plan known only to him. It says, no light, cold, or frost, neither day or night. Very weird. No sunlight, yet it's not cold outside. No day, yet it's not nighttime. It's almost as if there's an eclipse. And it says at evening time, there's actually light. But it's not sunlight. You see, it's just very thrown out of the ordinary. What's going on here? The light of God's glory emanates in this moment. The prophets envisioned this time when the sun shall be no more, and the Lord will be your everlasting light. Isaiah chapter 60, verse 19. On that day, verse 8, living waters shall flow out from Jerusalem, half of them to the eastern sea, and half of them to the western sea. It shall continue in summer as in winter. Living waters, waters that are therapeutic in nature. They carry therapeutic properties. Imagine being sick and taking just a glass of water and all of a sudden you're healed instantly. Think of a dog, right, that licks your wound. Just pour some water on a wound and it heals. That's the idea here. A therapeutic spring of water that produces an abundance of plant life and purification. If you really want to learn a lot about this, go to Ezekiel chapter 47, and you can read about that. But here, living waters flowing out from Jerusalem. These waters actually come from the temple itself, and it flows out from Jerusalem. And notice it makes its way to the Eastern Sea. What's the Eastern Sea? The Dead Sea. Perhaps you've had a chance to go to the Dead Sea. It's a body of water in the world that has the highest concentration of salt relative to the rest of the world. It's so salty that no marine life can even survive in it. But here, the Eastern Sea, the living waters, purify the Dead Sea. And all of a sudden, marine life starts to sprout in the Dead Sea because of the waters being purified by the living waters here coming out of Jerusalem. But it goes to the Western Sea as well, to the Mediterranean. The Mediterranean, if you will, is the passageway to the rest of the world. This is living water that's available for anybody and everybody. It will touch the world's water supply everywhere. We will all be able to enjoy these living waters coming from Jerusalem. Here we see in a very unique way Israel's role as the light to the nations. And it shall continue in summer as in winter. Now for us, we think winter is snow time and summer is sun time, right? Well, in a climate like Israel, you've got wet season and dry season. That's their summer and winter. So your wet season is winter, your dry season is summer. And the idea here is that these waters are going to flow. The emphasis is on the summertime, the dry season. These waters are going to be just as abundant during that time as they are during the winter time. And these waters will bring healing to the lands, healing to the people, the inhabitants of the earth, all flowing out of the temple, the dwelling place of God. Imagine a patient in the final stages of congestive heart failure. The entire body shuts down in that particular instance. Skin turns pale and cold. Lungs fill up with fluid. Breathing is labored. Mind becomes foggy. The whole system becomes poisoned simply because the heart fails. There's only one cure that can reverse this condition: a heart transplant. When a new, strong, healthy heart is put in its place and begins to beat. And when that happens, transformation is immediate. It starts from the center and works its way out to the rest of the body. The first beat pumps warm, oxygen-rich blood through the body, pushing life into every vessel. Color all of a sudden returns to the skin. The lungs clear up. The mind becomes sharp again. The entire system is brought back to life. From the very center of God's renewed kingdom, Jerusalem, from the temple itself, from his presence, God's presence, the presence of Jesus Christ in Jerusalem, a new source of life flows out. Living waters flow, and the poison that is killing the body is healed. And just like a dying body needs a new heart, our dying souls need a new heart as well. The promise of living waters flowing from Jerusalem, that points us to Christ our King. He said, "Whoever believes in me, out of his heart will flow rivers of living water." Jesus says, you know that living water that's going to make its way throughout the earth when I come to establish my kingdom? The spiritual blessing signified by that water is available to you now, if you will only but believe in me. And so as we close, the question remains, have you come to believe in Jesus as your King? The King who will one day split the mountain open has already opened the way for you through his cross and resurrection. And today he offers you his Spirit, the rivers of living water, abundance, and his heart. Will you receive him today? Let's pray.